So in the previous sessions, we talked about data and how data is important to a business, and it's also how they define their information that will lead them to making decisions. In this series of videos, I'm going to talk about data management specifically. So not just how important the data is to a business, but now how the business should manage that data. So the first topic here is discussing how there are certain problems that are encountered without data management. So there are certainly things that will arise if you don't have a good data management plan. So what is data management? Well, it's the management of data, and of course that's a sarcastic response, but that's exactly what you are doing. You are managing the data in some sort of controlled way and focused way so that you can affect the business's core responsibilities. So a business-focused definition from the BCS Data Management Specialist Group, this comes from the Gordon book that some of the readings come from. So data management is a corporate service which helps with the provision of information services by controlling or coordinating the definitions and usage of reliable and relevant data. So again, this is very business focused because it's a corporate service. It helps provision information services, or really the things that people do day to day and require information or data to be stored to do those tasks and those things. And the third key point there is it's control or coordinate definitions and usage of reliable and relevant data. So there has to be some idea for what the data should look like, and then who has access to that data, who can use it, and then it also has to be relevant. If you're just storing a bunch of irrelevant data, then it is pointless. So a broader definition from the ngdata.com is data management is an administrative process that includes acquiring, validating, storing, protecting, and processing required data to ensure the accessibility, reliability, and timeliness of the data for its users. So the key points in this definition are, number one, it's an administrative process. So this is something that has to have the highest level of buy-in from any corporation. The processes that are involved are acquiring data, so gathering it and placing it into some sort of storage mechanism. So that's the storing part. But before you place it into a storage mechanism, you want to validate it to ensure that it meets your requirements. And after it's there, you want to protect it and ensure that the people who are unauthorized do not have access to it, but all of the people who can see the data can readily access it. And processing is what we do in data analytics to determine value from the data itself. So we have to ensure accessibility, so people who need it can have it, reliability, in that the data that's stored is stored in such a way that you can consistently get to it, and when you read it, it looks the same, at least in formatting. And then timeliness is an issue because you don't want to wait around for the data that you need to make a critical decision, so that's very important. So the latter definition also implies that there are several problems associated with data management. Number one, data is hard to acquire. While certainly there is a lot of data out there in the world, it can be difficult to get. The reason for that is that a lot of the data that we have is stored in very different locations. So it could range from a desktop computer to a database that's actually stored on a person's computer, or it could be a server, or it could be in the cloud. So there are many different places that data are stored, especially for a corporate environment. Because that data can be stored all around and everywhere, some of it can be invalid because maybe the person storing data in a spreadsheet has their own way of processing it, but people who are just throwing data into a database because a sensor or something is collecting it, it may not match exactly. So some of that data could end up being invalid. Again, I've already mentioned the storing in multiple places, and it could be hard to find. That leads directly into the acquisition of data. And really, if you're doing research and things like that, sometimes data sets just simply do not exist. You have to create your own or find your own data sets. The data may not be protected. So if, again, you are storing data in a spreadsheet and you're passing around that spreadsheet, or you are sharing that spreadsheet through some mechanism like Microsoft Teams, it's not protected. That means that certain people have access to it, but others that should have access do not have access. And then finally, data can be difficult to process because it's not accessible, because it's not reliable, and because it can't be gathered fast enough. So it's again sometimes difficult to gather all of the data sources that you need and put them together in a fast enough manner to make decisions. That is why you definitely need a good data management plan. Some other problems that you could encounter, you cannot interface easily between multiple systems that you have. So because they haven't been defined and developed to work together in the first place, those information systems can't really be joined together other than doing something very rudimentary or finding a way to do it with a lot of guesswork. The second thing, data is hard to share between systems, or it's really not shared between information systems because it is hard to share. And even if it's possible to share and technically connect the information systems, it's usually impossible to share data between those systems because a lot of times the data are incompatible with one another. The third thing is communication breaks down, so data is lost. Communication, once that breaks down, information is not transferred properly. So without true data sharing, it becomes impossible for departments to kind of keep the information they need or get the information they need to carry out their jobs effectively. The fourth item there is data has to be transcribed or re-entered. That is certainly something we would never ever want to do, but it happens. If there is a need for information to be shared between incompatible information systems, the only option we have available is to rekey the information, and that is not a good plan at all. It's very resource intensive, and there is also a danger of the data being incorrectly transcribed. The other thing is you have to keep reinventing the wheel, and if you do that, a substantial portion of the time that you spend and the cost that you spend on development of an information system is simply taking up with analyzing the information and the data requirements and then the development of that database to meet those requirements. So you're constantly in this cycle of let me look at this data and see how we need to store it, when if you have a data management plan, you wouldn't have to do that. And finally, frustration sets in. And frustration is something that is very common in a situation like this, especially if you have bad data or you receive bad data. So users of information systems who find that they just don't have the right information or the right the right information at the right time can become really frustrated. So the IT or the IS staff, they are supporting those users, and then they are being constantly criticized because they also are the face of this system. So if the IT people are being criticized, then they are also going to become frustrated, and it's just a cycle that continues. So the best plan, instead of all of these things, is to develop a good data management plan so that you can avoid a lot of these problems.